Hi, I'm Julia. Welcome back to my YouTube channel, NB Library. And today I am doing the start of a reading vlog for family sagas. I love a family saga book. They're also known as multi-generational novels, or I just called them generational novels before I knew there was really a term for them. I've loved a family saga ever since I first read Homegoing by Yassi in college, my favorite book that I ever read for college. This one in particular is my favorite format of family sagas. It's almost a collection of short stories. Each chapter follows a different generation, a different member of the family. This one in particular has, I think, 10 generations. Another one that does it really well is Pachinko by Min-Jin Lee. This one is following kind of one woman in particular, but it is seeing her ancestors and then her descendants over the course of a long period of time. I really need to finish watching the Apple TV adaptation of this book. I watched the first episode and it was fantastic, so I just need to get to watching the rest of it. Another one is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This one follows not just one family, but several different people. Each chapter has one person as the focal point and it doesn't really return to them, but you find out that all of their stories are interconnected. Then some others are The Vanishing Half by Britt Bennett. God, I love that book. And Black Cake by Charmaine Wilkerson. I think the things that I love about a family saga are the historical fiction aspects, because I do love historical fiction, but I also love to see the way that generations affect each other and generational trauma affects us, and the similarities in generations over time and also the differences, and the way to see a particular facet of history through the eyes of one family in particular and how history shapes us and changes us. It's funny because the things about these books that I love are things that I don't like about other books, like that we kind of fall in love with one character and then never see them again. Normally that would bother me in a book, and the fact that it's sort of a short story collection. In the past, I haven't liked short story collections, but I've definitely come around on them. But for some reason, when it's a family saga book, all those elements really come together in a way that I particularly enjoy. Today, I'm going to start reading The Devil Three Times by Ricky Fain. I talked about this one a little bit in my TBR Harvest video, since I'm also reading it for TBR Harvest, but this is a story similar to Homegoing, I believe, where each chapter follows a different generation. And in this book, the devil is trying to get back into heaven, and to do that, he's trying to help this one particular black family over many centuries and generations. And I just love that premise. So I'm really excited to get to reading this. I will give you my thoughts when I'm done and then talk about the rest of the books that I'm reading for this vlog. I've often said that if I were an animated character, this would be my go-to outfit. I finished The Devil Three Times by Ricky Fain last night. I was going to update, but then I was too tired because I woke up at 5:45 and couldn't get back to sleep, which happened again today. Yay! When I heard about the premise of this book and before I started it, I thought that it might be a 5-star candidate. I've been analyzing recently what makes a 5-star for me, and there's no like one thing, so I can never really predict. And like less than 5% of the books that I've read this year have been 5 stars. I've been very strict with my 5-star ratings, but hello, Chrissy. Hi. Do you want to film? Hello. Now she's rubbing her face on my leg. Ultimately, after having finished this, I am going to rate it 3 stars. Christine, stop. Stop. By no means was this book objectively bad. I think that there were technical things that were done really, really well. I was just bored for a majority of it. And I thought that the devil was going to be in it more. I really liked and was really intrigued by his chapters, but they come few and far between. And then he has occasional conversations with the family members, but it's really not as much involvement as I was picturing. Without spoiling anything, when I first read the last page and closed the book, I wasn't super satisfied by the devil's ending, but I slept on it and I thought about it, and I think that it does make sense and is a very poignant ending, but I guess I would have had more connection to the devil as a character if he'd been in it more. He was in it about as much as death is in a Terry Pratchett book that is not actively about him. But what I said about the book being technically really proficient is that the author is able to utilize so many different voices and writing styles in every chapter. We have chapters in first, third, even second person, chapters in past tense and present tense. There was one chapter that was very much in the style of a kind of overwrought thesaurus using 19th century writer, because that character reads a lot of books and he lives in the 1800s. There were chapters where there were no quotation marks, there were chapters where there were chapters with sentences that slide back and forward in time. The second chapter in the book is one where the sentences are very long, and I was a little worried, but that is not a writing style that the author utilizes the entire book. It only comes up a few times. If you hear clicking, I'm sorry, it's my roommate's dog. Her nails on the hardwood floor are very loud. So this is an entire sentence. But before Franklin could clear the line of poplars Jean Laurent planted to secret his land from covetous neighbors who still couldn't fathom why Captain Jack Talbot, the man whom their fathers had followed first into battle against the Indians, and then, later, in a caravan of covered wagons to the eastern banks of the Mississippi, had all but gifted his plantation to a queer Creole sailor whom nobody had even so much as laid eyes on when the country was rife with Protestant planters of marriageable age, while others, those who'd heard the rumor about him and his daughter, wondered how he'd ever found anyone willing to marry her at all. Robert whistled. I feel like that info dump didn't need to happen right in the middle of an active sentence. But as I said, I did think that the author's ability to switch between all of these literary voices was very impressive. There were so many cycles of things happening in the book that cropped up in generations over and over again, which really drove home some of the themes, but it also made the generations and the people hard to tell apart because the same things were happening to people over and over again. Infidelity, suicide, particularly suicide by drowning, incest, adoption, and a lot of people's names were similar. We had John, James, Louis, Lucille. I would have enjoyed it more if the family was more distinct, and it felt like for a good chunk of the middle we were only focusing on the male characters and kind of leaving their female family members by the wayside. And then later on in the book, when it focused more on the women, I did find myself more engaged. Not that I'm only engaged by reading female characters, but so many of the men's voices and troubles just felt very similar to me. And most of the book takes place in this one town, Laurent, where the plantation is at the beginning of the book that eventually becomes an incorporated town, and only one or two characters ever get out in all the generations of this family, and so it feels a little bit claustrophobic, but at the same time, I don't really have a good description of what the town looks like, so I don't have a good sense of its geography or how big it is, or I know that there's a significant creek that a lot of people have gone to over the years, and it seems small enough that people know other people's business, and there's a church and a cemetery, but other than that, I didn't really have a good idea of what living in the town was like. One of my favorite sections was Lucy Laurent, one of the youngest generations, who is an artist and has a really complicated relationship with her mom, who was able to go to Chicago, marries an older man, goes to school, and then ends up in an abusive kind of mentor-mentee relationship with a older female artist. And I think that her story worked so well for me because it was a complete story beginning to end. We had a lot of context, we had catharsis and emotional release, and other sections that I didn't connect with as well were just literally like a slice of someone's life. I didn't feel like I got to know a lot about them. I didn't feel like there was any kind of good conclusion. Lucy's story, I mean, I think I was glad to read from the perspective of a female character, but I also felt like it was doing all the things that I wanted the book to be doing earlier. If all the sections had been like Lucy's, this would have been a lot more like what I was looking for. Props to the author for including gay, lesbian, and gender non-conforming characters. I did have to kind of push myself through, especially because I wanted to read it before the end of the month, but I was like, okay, if I can read 100 pages a day, I can get it done by this date, and I don't really need to do that with books that I'm enjoying. The next book that I'm going to read for this vlog, I have it on my e-reader here, is Aednan by Linnea Axelsson and translated from Swedish by Saska Vogel. This is a novel in verse about two Sami families in northern Sweden who are separated and the trials and tribulations that happen to them over the course of about 100 years and several generations. I think this one is going to be a fairly quick read, but devastating, and I'm really interested to learn more about the Sami people and the people indigenous to that region of the world. But meaning that there will be some really beautiful poetic passages. Historically, I've really enjoyed books in verse. So I'm excited to get this one started, and I will let you know my review when I'm finished. Thought I'd try out a new camera angle in front of my TBR cart. There's only so many places in my room that I could film, and I was getting tired of filming in my reading corner because I always have to block the light with my head. I'm gonna ask for a ring light for Christmas. Don't worry about it. I finished reading Aednan by Linnea Axelsson today. I was alternating between listening to it on audio and reading it physically, or rather digitally. I had it on my e-reader. And it's a very short book. Well, it has a lot of pages. It's a book in verse, and there aren't that many words per page. It's almost in a haiku format without sticking to the structure of haiku. It was a really beautiful book, and I think it was really impressive how much of the book and how much the events of the book went unsaid. There are so many things that are implied, or so many things that you sort of intuit on your own without needing to be told. In the beginning of the book, there is a young Sami couple. They have two sons, one of whom is developmentally disabled, and their older son has an accident one day while he and his father are herding their reindeer, and he eventually passes away. We are never told exactly why. It seemed like the wound got infected or something like that. And then because of policies in Sweden, the family is forced to go to an area that is unfamiliar to them and bring their herd with them, even though they and their herd and their people have been living and herding their reindeer in this one particular region for generations. They're forced to leave their son's grave behind. We then follow another family, and this is something that is left unsaid, and I'm not quite sure what the relationship is between the original family and the second one that the book follows. I think that the grandmother of the second family may have been friends with the first one, based on a few lines in the book, but it's not quite clear. And the plot moves kind of backward and forward in time. We skip around. The last few chapters, the last few poems are moving backwards in time from when these two children, brother and sister, are adults in the 2010s fighting for Sami rights, and then moving back and back and back and back until they're much younger in the 80s. Because the prose is so sparse and it's doing so much with just a few lines, you're not quite getting the level of interiority that you would with a novel, and you are only spending so much time with each character, as it is sort of in the conventions of the family saga genre, you're following all these different characters. It's sort of an ensemble piece. I think our best poets can conjure an entire world with just a few lines. That is what some of my favorite poetry does, and I think that Axelsson really achieved that here, and Saskia Vogel, the translator, with I was there in the fells in Upper Scandinavia. I could feel the water and the wind and feel the fur of the reindeer and just see everything that was being described and implied. There was such a strong sense of place. I think that with the jumping around in the timeline and just some of the nature of it being this very sparse story in verse, I didn't feel connected to it as I could have, and I felt like it was a little bit muddied at the end. But I did really love the language and the descriptions, and so I am rating it 3.75 stars. It feels like I've been filming this family solo video for forever. I have 2 books left to read for it, and I really haven't worked on this video in a while. I've been working on other videos alongside. So the 2 books that I have left to read are Zeal by Morgan Jerkins and There Are Rivers in the Sky by Leaf Shafak. I got this as a giveaway at one of my local indie bookstores. It's an ARC. I was really lucky to find this because it was already on my TBR. I have read Morgan Jerkins' nonfiction work, Wandering in Strange Lands, which is about her family's history with the Great Migration. And this book also involves the Great Migration, but it spans about 150 years and several generations, sort of starting in 2019 and then flashing back to this previous ancestral relationship and heartbreak and all kinds of things, going from the end of the Civil War through to present day. And then There Are Rivers in the Sky is, I think, still a family saga book, but more a book of multiple timelines and people being kind of cosmically connected by the Epic of Gilgamesh, and then also connected by the River Thames and the River Tigris. I can't decide which one to read, so I'm going to go with whichever's first sentence I like the best. So I'll read those out loud to you and then use that to decide which one I'll read next. Starting with There Are Rivers in the Sky. I'm really hoping that I like this because Alicia Fack has a lot of other books, and so if I like her, then I have a whole back catalog to read. Alright, we start with some epigraphs by Ovid, Yeats, and Hafitz. Another epigraph from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Table of contents. Okay, Part 1, Raindrop. By the river Tigris, in olden times. Later, when the storm has passed, everyone will talk about the destruction it left behind, though no one, not even the king himself, will remember that it all began with a single raindrop. I do like when it hints at future things. And then Zeal. Prologue, October 2019. A harvest moon glowed above the Manhattan skyline and Brooklyn Bridge on the evening of Oliver Benjamin and Ardelia Gibbs's engagement party. I feel like it's a lot less gripping, and it's just more descriptive, and it's also just kind of what I expected from the back of the book. So, I'm going to go with There Are Rivers in the Sky. Really hoping that I enjoy this one. I went out and bought it specifically because I was really excited about it. I'm really hoping that I like it. And I think as I'm reading this, I'll be using this bookmark. It's so cool. This is by Leah Rose. I've talked about her book reviews and art before, but I'll link to her shop down below where you can buy this bookmark and others like it. It's been over a week since I last updated this family saga video, and I have quite a bit to update you on, although mainly things that happened a week ago and then in the last 8 hours or so. But where I last left off, I had started, I just flipped through the names of 2 other river-related titles that I've read this year. A River Has Roots and Is a River Alive, before getting to There Are Rivers in the Sky by Alicia Fack. I, unfortunately, am soft DNFing this book. I was reading it when my mind was kind of on other things. I was thinking about my fantasy novel, and I was getting a little bit fed up with this book, unfortunately. So I can definitely see good things in it. There are things that I'm enjoying, but I was kind of rolling my eyes at certain points, and so it's a soft DNF for now. And this is also not really a family saga book. It's a dual timeline book, but the characters are not, as far as I know, 176 pages in, related. There are parallels between all of their storylines, but they are not themselves family members, so kind of failed on that point. Me, not the book. We're following 3 characters: a young man named Arthur in the 1840s, a girl named Noreen in Turkey who's a member of the Yazidi religion in 2014, and then a woman, a scientist of hydroecology studies named Zalika, who's living in London in 2018. Now, I really like Zalika's storyline. I like parts of Arthur's storyline. Noreen's I'll get into in a little bit. But Arthur, his sections are very Dickensian in the subject matter, in the writing style, and I was reading this, and like I was hanging out with my roommate and she was doing homework, and I was like, man, this book is so, like, she's really trying to like write like Dickens. And then, I shit you not, what character has a cameo in this book? Sorry, not character, real life man. Charles Dickens is a character in this book. I'm not even joking. So that, I had to scoff at that. And what made me put the book down is that Arthur is the Forrest Gump of Victorian England. Because he's got so many bad things going on in his life. He accidentally gives his little brother cholera, his dad is abusive, his mom's addicted to laudanum, gets kicked out of his awful school because the headmaster sucks, but Arthur's just a sweet little ooh precious boy. He has a perfect memory. He's got this thirst for knowledge. He loves reading and he remembers everything he reads. But anyway, the part that made me put down the book is he goes to the British Museum, which is a dream he's had for a long time. He just didn't have the right outfit to wear, thinking he'd be thrown out if he shows up in the clothes that he owns, and Charles Dickens gives him an outfit to wear because he impressed Charlie so much. And he sees some tablets in the British Museum, and there's a picture of them in the book, and it's writing from Mesopotamia in cuneiform, which we now know, or now call cuneiform. It's a very early form of writing. And he asks a curator, what does this say? And the curator's like, oh, it doesn't say anything, it's chicken scratch. And he's like, I think it's writing, and I'm gonna come here every day on my lunch break until I, Arthur, solve cuneiform. And at that point I was like, there's gotta be a historical person that figured out what cuneiform says, and it wasn't this guy. So that made me put the book down. And then Noreen's sections are, she's living on the banks of the Tigris, in Turkey. She's living with her grandmother, and they're a member of the Yazidi faith. And I'd not heard of this religion. It's based on this book and on my research, a more obscure religion originating from Iran. And this Yazidi community is being pushed out and forced to relocate because they're going to build a dam and the river in the area is going to be flooded. This also happened in, what did I just read? I want to say in Wandering Stars there was a part where people were displaced because the area got flooded by a dam. But anyway, not a lot is happening in Noreen's plotline. Like, so many years have passed. In Arthur's plotline, he's impressed Charles Dickens, he's translating cuneiform, he's a special boy, and all of Noreen's sections are basically just her and her grandmother talking over the course of a few days. And Noreen has this condition where she's slowly going deaf. They want to take her to the sacred valley in Iran and baptize her, because she still hasn't been baptized yet, even though she's already 9. But those sections are mainly just like the grandmother saying really beautiful things, and that wouldn't bother me so much on the face of it, but it just feels like it's written purposefully to be beautiful and make you go like, wow, and like quote it in your Goodreads reviews, you know? And it just, with the Charles Dickens of it all, it just was feeling a little bit hokey to me. And just the fact that like nothing else is really happening in Noreen's sections other than her grandmother saying like paragraphs of this kind of hokey to me text. Honestly, the person's storyline that I'm enjoying the most is Zuleika's. She has recently separated from her husband, she bought a houseboat on the Thames, and she is suicidal. Her parents passed away when she was young, she was raised by her rich aunt and uncle, and she had some scenes with her aunt and uncle at their house where she went over for dinner, and they're very clearly not super compatible people, but have both learned to adjust to each other. And the book is kind of saying something about, like, you know, Zalika's relationship, and her uncle is like, well, just make things work, don't get divorced. My wife and I make things worse and work, and we don't like each other. That's not what he says outright, but that's kind of like what he's implying. And so I'm just intrigued by Zalika and her relationship, and her mental health that she's struggling with, but the book is spending the least amount of time with her, and I maybe it's just that things are happening in her plotline, unlike in Noreen's, but she's not impressing Charles Dickens like in Arthur's plotline. I would honestly not mind reading a story that's just about this, like, modern day Turkish British hydroecologist in England, but anyway, soft DNFing that for now. I'm keeping it on my shelves. I bought it. I will probably come back to it. But I started and finished, since I last filmed, Zeal by Morgan Jerkins, a proper generational novel. So we also kind of following two timelines in this. One that starts in 1865, right after emancipation and the end of the Civil War, and then also in 2020, where Ardelia and Oliver, this couple, have just gotten engaged, and Oliver's family history is that they have these letters from his ancestors written during and after the 1860s, when these two formerly enslaved people have been separated by slavery and are trying to find each other again. And so then after that, like, prologue in 2020, we go back to these two people, Tirzah and Harrison, and follow their descendants all the way up to the 1920s. And then we're following Tirzah and Harrison and their descendants for a good long while, go back to 2020, and then flashback again. There's a lot of discussion of COVID in this book, so if that is going to be an issue for people, Oliver is a doctor and is dealing with a lot of the early COVID cases, and just being a doctor from January to May 2020, and how horrific that is and that was. I don't feel like I have as much to say about this one. I felt like the language didn't draw me in all that much. By the end of it, I was really compelled, and sort of with all of the messiness of the relationships and kind of some mysteries in the family tree, I was definitely hooked. But I did read the first 100 pages of this and then not come back to it for several days. A lot of that is because I was focusing on other things, but tonight I just sat down and I was like, I need to finish this, I need to get this video up. Without spoiling too much, we're following Tirzah and then her descendants and some, I think, as I said, very messy relationship dynamics. People are sleeping with each other's spouses and everyone knows about it, and a lot of the book is set in this small all-black town in Kansas named Nicodemus, which still exists. I was reading up about it, and it has a census of 14 people that live there, but it is on the National Register of Historic Places, or it's kind of like preserved and overseen by the National Park Service, being, I think, the oldest and longest existing all-black town. As I said when I was first talking about this book, we've got the Great Migration of coming up from Mississippi to Kansas, and then eventually family members end up in Chicago. The initial generations that were freed from slavery and still had to deal with horrific conditions, still living in the same town where their former owners live, and seeing them on the street and sometimes having to still work for them, and just horrible, tragic things that no one can really escape happening over and over again. I think because of the like relationship messiness of it all, it wasn't a book that was especially for me. It doesn't mean that it's bad. I am going to rate it a 3.75, and I think that the modern day, the 2020 plot line could have been stronger. It went on for a while and is also another like kind of relationship that's getting messy, and there is all of the horrors of living through COVID in early 2020, but I just kind of wanted more time given to the historical timeline and a little bit given to the kind of later generations in the 1920s storyline, because I think that the 1920s and 30s are really interesting. I have been learning more recently about the Harlem Renaissance, so I was biased towards wanting to know more about that, but I still did enjoy the sections in Nicodemus and the all-black town. 3.75, and I'm not giving up on this author by any means. So that's gonna wrap up my Family Saga vlog. Honestly, there have been some good books in this vlog, some okay books in this vlog, but I've read two family sagas that I've really enjoyed for a video that's coming out next week, which I didn't plan, but I am drawn to these. So you can look forward to seeing that when it comes out, hopefully next week. I'm gonna really try my darndest to keep myself on schedule here. But thank you very much for watching. Please remember to like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time. Bye.